welcome to Honest Car Reviews. My name is Eric and this is the Volkswagen Arteon Shooting Brake R. It's a sports estate and I'll try to explain where this sits in Volkswagen's lineup. You have the Golf Sports Combi R and then you have the Passat, and this car sits just between these two. And in terms of competition, you have the Mercedes CLA 35 Shooting Brake, the BMW M340i and the Audi S4. But back to this Arteon R. It is underneath basically the same as the Golf R, the Tiguan R, and this concept of Rifying Volkswagens has been almost finalized with this Arteon R. So underneath you have the EA888 engine with 320 horsepower and 420 Nm of torque. Goes through a 7-speed DS gear, double clutch gearbox, and is then going through a front wheel biased 4-motion four-wheel drive system that can send 50% of the power to the rear and 100% of that power to each of the rear wheels, which means that it can torque vectoring. It is nothing new, but this car has it, as in almost or literally every other R model in Volkswagen's lineup. Those are the headlines, but we'll look into the design, going to the interior, the space and how it is to drive. So we start with the exterior, and in terms of design I think that this Arteon R is the best looking Volkswagen out there. And that is a quite impressive task, because this looks unlike any other Volkswagen, but it still looks like a Volkswagen. And let me explain. This lower front looks quite similar to a lot of other R models, but is still unique with this Arteon lights and front fascia. And since it is a shooting brake, have a slightly down sloping roof and quite wide rear hips and this rather hefty rear. The rear is as good looking as the front, which is quite a difficult task. Most often the front is the prominent design feature of a car, but I think the rear is as good looking. And you have actually real exhaust. But the problem with a shooting brake is that you often have to intrude on the rear luggage capacity with this angled roof. So we'll look at how the rear compartment is. You have a massive, and I mean massive, lip. It is about 15 centimeters high, and there's a lot of thickness between the body and the interior luggage, which means that it isn't as wide as I thought it would be, but it's still quite far in. But when you look at the numbers compared to the non-shooting brake Arteon, there's only a liter here and there that is different between these two, which is quite interesting. So it's not the biggest luggage wise, but you can still fit a lot of things. And before I go in, I need to talk about some more things that makes this an R. And that is of course the brakes and the suspension. So the brakes are bigger. There are 2 pistons in the front, 1 piston in the rear. They are just under 360 millimeters in the front, and they provide quite an okay amount of braking performance. These are winter tires, so in terms of the dynamic capabilities of this car, of course some tires are to prefer, but we are in November here in Sweden and it's raining, so that's not optimal when reviewing a car, but it is what it is. And in the end, this is a fantastic looking car with an interesting power plant that I'll talk more about in just a minute. It's quite dark in here, but you have a panoramic sunroof that extrudes quite far backwards, so you get quite a lot of natural light. And I sit quite comfortably in the rear. I don't like this fake carbon fiber design, and even though this is on quality leather, you can see that it creases quite a lot, and you can even see that there's some excess material since it has been creased. You can feel it's not laying correctly over the seating material, so that's a bit weird. You have some lights in this side panel, and it has some metal, but all in all I feel it's a quite dark interior to sit in. I would like some more metal in the side doors, but I have a lot of leg space actually, and I think I have quite a decent amount of lower thigh support. Some details are familiar to other Volkswagen models, but some are quite unique, and especially the horizontal bar here. It looks quite Audi-ish, which is a good thing. It makes this Arteon feel unique and different compared to other Volkswagen models. Other things are quite familiar. This new Volkswagen R steering wheel with bigger shift pedals and haptic touch. You have manual controls to circle through the different mode buttons. So you have sport, race, individual, comfort. And in individual, which you can adapt, the DCC, you have a lot of levels to choose from. I really like that I've done this instead of having this haptic button that you have in the Golf R, for example. You have to press it to go into a menu, and then you can change it. Of course you have the R button, but that always goes into the race mode. Go back to menu, and you see that it is a bit slow, especially when booting up. It's fairly easy to navigate, but it is different compared to the newest Volkswagen models. For a car that in this spec costs over 70,000 euros, and as a base spec above 60. Is this the level of infotainment system that you expect? It feels a bit cheapish, but underneath you have dedicated controls for the climate system. They're not buttons, but they work fairly well, and they light up when it's dark, which means that you can see where you press. Good there, Volkswagen. The digital gauge cluster is similar to the newest generation Volkswagens, which means that it is easily readable, but to be able to change these side things, you actually have to go into vehicle on the infotainment system and go to choices, digital cockpit. So you have auto, classic, you can have customized views. In terms of the shifter, it feels like the Golf R Mark 7, and it feels like it has been a mishmash sometimes. This feels new, this feels new, this feels a bit older, a bit different, this feels old, a mishmash. But on the whole, it looks quite okay. Right now I'm doing what this car will do for the majority of the time. Drive on the highway at regular speeds. And what surprised me the most was how approachable and easygoing it is. Sometimes driving a more powerful engine or a powerful car can feel a bit unnerving. It can feel like it is a lot to take in. This is the complete opposite. The suspension is also very soft without feeling whooshy, and it soaks up the bumps very nicely. But don't forget that these are winter tires, which means that they will probably be softer than the summer equivalent. The road noise is fairly minimal, as well as the wind noise. All in all, the regular car experience, the commuting experience, the normal driving experience has been more or less faultless. The cruise control if I'm not mistaken, in the new Golf R Mark 8, if you want to increase the speed, there are two levels to this plus button. The first you press and then you'll increase the speed by 1 kilometer an hour. But if you press a bit harder, it will jump up in 10. Here there's only one level where you jump up by 10 kilometers an hour. So if you want to increase the speed by 5 kilometers an hour or something, you will have to apply the gas and then set the speed. So that's a bit different. I don't know if this button has been broken or that's just the way it is. Since it is a shooting brake, they have minimized the rear view area, the rear window, and the C-pillar is really large, and that combined with a sloping rear roof means that the blind spot is fairly large. But you have of course the blind spot assist, so that's great, and they light up here so you will notice them. Some use a little warning or triangle. I like that Volkswagen has a more prominent warning feature like this. One thing that I also noticed is the rear view camera, or the backing camera, has a really bad resolution, and especially when it gets a bit darker, the display is, the quality is really bad. But we're doing it in comfort and more normal. Now we need to test it how it feels driving more sporty. So put it into sport, and there's a nice in between comfort and race, but it is in race where things happen. The sounds from the engine that is pumped through the speakers is a clear difference, and you get some pops from the exhaust. Actually, it feels like you get more pops in this car than the Golf R. The steering gets heavier, and of course the throttle response is quicker, and the brake pedal is stiffer. The suspension also gets stiffer, which means that it crashes about more than I would like. Perhaps this race mode is perfectly calibrated for the racetrack, but for this back road I would perhaps go with individual and choose comfort or sport for the suspension. But I can switch to manual, and since you have a longer wheelbase, and since the R concept is at least approachability in daily use with a lot of speed, I think that the Arteon R is extremely approachable and extremely compliant and planted. And when you push it, it is actually the front that starts to understeer a bit, since it is also mainly front wheel driven. But with the four-wheel drive, it helps you really nicely to rotate, and with the balance, with the longer wheelbase, it's actually fun, easy, stable, and enjoyable. But 320 horsepower, above 400 Nm, but a 4-cylinder, and a price here of about 72,000. The CLA 45S has 421 horsepower and starts at 67,000 euros. You get more performance for the money, and that's the same story with the BMW 340 and the Audi S4. While the Audi S4 I don't think looks as nicely as this Arteon R, it's evident that this car sits at the bottom of the totem pole when you look at performance. And if that is something that you value, numbers, this is perhaps not the car for you. But with the unique exterior that really differentiates this car in the segment, it is definitely a car to consider when you want to buy a fast estate. In terms of performance and larger cars from Volkswagen, either they have to relook the totem pole inside the VAG lineup, or do something fun and switch it all up. And that's my final review for the Volkswagen Arteon R shooting brake. See you next time.